With the conflicts in Ukraine and the Middle East on the forefront, Canada's Defence Minister Bill Blair is in Italy meeting with ministers from other G7 countries. And today's meetings are being held as the wars in Ukraine and the Middle East continue unabated. Italy's defence minister opened the meetings today saying the G7 faces a deteriorated security framework. The three-day summit wraps up on Sunday. Now, ahead of the summit, Blair announced a nearly $65 million aid package for Ukraine. This includes small arms, ammunition, and protective gear. The money is part of a previous $500 million military funding commitment made by the Prime Minister over the summer. More than $4 billion in military aid has been committed to Ukraine by Canada since Russia's invasion in 2022. And let's bring in the minister now. Bill Blair joins us from Italy. And Minister, thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me, Roger.
Well, Russia, Ukraine, Israel, Hamas at the top of the agenda of the G7. Any progress being made or any direction from the G7 on them?
Yeah, a lot of really important work was done. We had conversations today about the situation in Ukraine, and Rustem Umerov came and joined us as well. We also had the representative from the EU and NATO also at the meeting. But our conversations ranged beyond the Ukraine, of course. We talked about the global south. We talked about some of the security concerns and work that we are all collectively doing in Africa, in the Indo-Pacific region. And we also talked about defense sustainability. We are a table of defense ministers after all, and I think there's some really important work that we are doing with our industries, with our innovators, and the work that we have to do to make sure that we secure our supply chains. And so it was a fairly wide-ranging discussion among the G7 defense ministers, but I think there was a lot of real value that was added, and as well in response to some of the most immediate situation that's taking place in the Middle East. There was also some discussion on work that we could do collectively together to create perhaps greater stability and peace in the region.
And I want to come back to that in just one second, but the Italian defense minister opened saying it's a deteriorated security framework. What does that mean? Are there concerns that there could be issues elsewhere in the world, not just those two main focuses right now?
Well, there was a great deal of focus in our discussions about the conflict currently, and that for almost 1,000 days has been taking place in Ukraine, and all of the countries that are represented by the G7 have been stalwart supporters of Ukraine and made very significant contributions and reiterated our commitment to continue to support Ukraine in its struggle against Russia's illegal invasion of their country. But we were also talking a lot about our concerns about the conflict in the Middle East and how it has the potential to potentially expand. When we're seeing the intervention of Iran, the work of Hezbollah, Hamas, and the Houthis in the region, it is deeply concerning. We also talked a little bit today about the influence of Daesh in Iraq and in Syria, and some concern about its growing influence in the African subcontinent, and the work that we are all collectively doing there together. And as well, although the Indo-Pacific is not an area of conflict, there have been some confrontation that has taken place in the South China Sea, in the Taiwanese Strait, and we all reiterated our commitment to continue to work together to uphold that rules-based order that maintains peace throughout the globe and encourages and supports those countries who are committed to following the rules, and perhaps sends a message of deterrence to those who would challenge those rules.
Now, with Ukraine, Canada announced another $65 million, part of that $500 million package. What will be part of that package, and is there more money or more support on the way for Ukraine, or is Canada being stressed by this?
No, the Prime Minister made a fairly significant commitment when we were in Washington together in July at the NATO summit of about $500 million, and we're starting to deliver some components of that. We've got some work to do, and there's much more coming. I can also tell you that President Biden has called a leaders summit of the NATO leaders that'll take place in November. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to provide more clarity on all of the work that we're doing with Ukraine. But in my conversations, both at the NATO meetings and even here today in Naples with Rustem Umerov, he's been very clear about what their requirements are. We want to I know you've asked me about our contribution. It involved money for small arms and munitions, some uniforms, some supports that we're providing. The Canadian Armed Forces are providing training to their members. But we're also talking about investing in Ukrainian capacity and industry, because I think they've done some remarkable work in building up their own industries and developing drones and other munitions. And we want to support those industries. I think it's a real opportunity for Canadian industry to work with them as well. There are many other forms of aid that we'll be able to provide more information with. And a lot of the conversation we had today, Roger, among all of the allies supporting Ukraine, is the importance of delivering on the commitments that we have made.
And with the Middle Eastern concerns, obviously what is happening there, there has been optimism that with Sinwar's death, that we could be closer to peace there. The G7, are they looking at options on what might facilitate the peace or maybe bring it on faster?
Yeah, we've had some, I think, important discussions about how we can contribute to bringing greater stability into the region. We believe, for example, in the conflict in Lebanon, that first of all, we don't believe that the Hezbollah should, because they are a terrorist organization, should have any role in the governance of Lebanon. But in order to maintain peace and stability in the region, the G7 countries discussed today forming a working group to see how we can support the Lebanese armed forces, for example, and some of the other resources that we might be able to bring to bear to try to create a situation where there would be security guarantees for both countries, Israel and Lebanon, and that we could find a way to stabilize that current situation and to facilitate de-escalation. You know, I think there is, you know, we've called for a ceasefire, but I think we also recognize we're going to have to do work to make sure that both sides of this ceasefire would respect a peaceful settlement, and we're working towards that. We've seen some escalation even today with further drone attacks directed into Israel. We are concerned about the possibility of escalation, and at the same time, we also recognize there's some work to do to make sure that we contribute to a de-escalation of the tension in the region.
Okay, Minister, thank you very much for joining us today.
Yeah, thank you very much, Roger, for having me. Have a good day.